Our job as worship leaders is simply to deliver our Messiah to them and then to disappear. What I want so desperately is for people to show up and leave church going, wow, what a great God.
Hey, welcome to episode 11 of the Loop Community Podcast. My name is Matt McCoy. I'm the founder of Loop Community, and I'm here with Derek.
How's it going?
Hey, Derek. How's it going?
Good.
You having a good day today?
I am.
So we're here in the Loop Community office in Chicago, and it's been a very cold week.
Very cold.
Chicago has seen temperatures down to like minus 20.
Yes.
Which is kind of crazy.
It's absolutely painful to be outside.
Well, wherever you guys are listening from, I hope that your 2018 is off to an excellent start.
Yes.
This is my favorite time of year because you kind of get a reset. Even though what's funny is that, it's not like it's it's just a normal day.
Right.
But I think the concept of kind of starting a new year gives you an opportunity just to kind of mentally reset and be like, okay,
for sure.
I'm going to develop new habits. I'm going to change my work patterns. I'm going to start new projects. And so this is my favorite time of year, and we have a great podcast to start off this year.
Yeah, we do.
And a great interview with Chad Negley, who's a local worship leader and a pastor at a church here in Chicago, actually called Christ Church of Oak Brook. And it's an awesome church. My in-laws actually go to this church, which is how I even know about it. Mm-hmm. And I've led worship there a few times. As I've gotten to know all the staff there and the pastors there, they're just really solid people. They have great preaching and great worship. But I think most of all, what has really stood out to me about this church is they're just so friendly and warm. You never have this feeling of like these people are unapproachable or everybody's like too cool for me or
right.
You know what I mean? Like it's this like family feel. Like immediately you just feel like you could have Thanksgiving dinner at someone's house, and
right.
and it'd be okay with them. And I think that's awesome. That's a great thing for a church, I feel like. So
yeah, definitely. I met Chad when he came to the office, and just for a few minutes, and you could tell the genuineness. Like he cared, he wanted to know you, even though it's just saying hi.
Yeah,
that's great in a church. I love when church is a family more than like, oh, here we go to church. It's a place where you want to be, and that's a lot about the people.
Right, it makes a big difference
for sure.
So Chad's a great worship leader, but as I've gotten to know Chad, I've also realized that Chad is just an amazing pastor. Like he has just a pastor's heart, and he has so many good nuggets to share about leading worship. And just he has such a great way to encourage worship leaders and what they're doing, and kind of recenter the focus on what matters and why we're doing what we're doing. And so I'm excited about this interview. I think it's going to be really helpful for all of our listeners. So
yeah, let's listen.
Without further ado, here's Chad Negley. Chad, thanks for joining us on the Loop Community Podcast. Good to see you.
Thanks.
And it wasn't long ago that I saw you, because yesterday we led worship together.
That's right. We did.
So Chad is the, what would you call yourself? What's your title?
The official title is Contemporary Worship Director.
Okay. So he's like overall the worship at a church here in Chicago called Christ Church of Oak Brook. And I've been leading there occasionally. And it's been really good to just kind of join you guys and just be worshiping with your church. It's an awesome place. Great things going on there.
Hey, man.
Chad and I have been, friends for probably a year, maybe 2 years now, written some songs together. But what I've really appreciated about Chad is his just heart to pastor worship leaders. And about a month ago, you kind of brought, all the worship leaders from Christ Church together at a coffee shop. Yeah. There were probably like 6 or 8 of us. I don't know.
Something like that, yeah.
You gathered us together, and you were, going to kind of do this devotional, I guess, with us, but talking with us about, I remember you teed it off by saying, we want to make sure that you're flourishing as a worship leader. And what are the things that we need to do to help you flourish as a worship leader? And I thought that was really cool that there was a focus on I don't know, just like building into the people who are leading your church,
Yeah.
building into your volunteers,
Yeah.
building into the people who are leading your worship services.
Yes.
Of like, okay, this is an important thing to be talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And you started off by having us all take out a piece of paper and write down 10 things that are on our minds. Because you were talking about this idea of like, what's filling your mind? Like, what is emotionally draining you right now?
Yes.
Or I don't even know if that's the word you used, emotionally draining.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I just made that up. But what was that exercise really about?
Yeah, it's basically taking the 8 or 10 things that are on your mind and saying, this is what I'm spending most of my time thinking about. And the idea is to connect what you're thinking about with what you're feeling about them. Because I think there's times when we spend a lot of time thinking about all the things happening in our life and we're completely unaware of what those things are doing to us emotionally.
Right.
So if I could take us to a place where we could see what's driving us emotionally, then we could start to get a better sense of how we're really doing.
Right. Because all those things are actually taking some sort of brain power or emotional power. It's taking from something else. Like
Yes.
these things that are on your mind. And so I think it was just a really cool exercise to kind of like look and see like, wow, there's actually a lot of stuff I'm thinking about or really concerned about.
Yes.
But you kind of brought it to this idea of like, okay, these things are maybe affecting your spiritual journey and like, or how you're leading worship.
Yeah, they really are. They're like, it's like having a cup and having a hole in the bottom of your cup, and it's constantly there. That sometimes we have this impression that we could fill the bottom of the cup and seal off that hole, but that's not life. That's not real life. Real life is always having a hole at the bottom of that cup, and your life's constantly being poured out, especially as a worship leader. And so when you step into a weekend, if you're ignoring the emotional health of your life, eventually you become completely empty.
Right.
And you've got nothing left and you hit rock bottom.
Right.
And when you hit rock bottom as a worship leader, everybody suffers. The church suffers, your team suffers. The whole idea of your church even flourishing on a weekend suffers.
Right.
Because you've got nothing to give.
Right.
Yeah. It's funny because over the years as a worship leader, sometimes I look at some of the musicians on the stage and I think they're not plugged in. They're not with me right now. Sometimes I'll attribute that to them just not caring. But the reality is it's not about them not caring. It's literally they're carrying something into the weekend or any worship event that I'm running that I may or may not be aware of. They may not even be aware of it.
Right.
And that's what's so important about, I think, the aspect of our emotional health as a worship leader.
Right.
Because we're obviously aware of what we're thinking about, but there's so often times when we're not aware of how it's affecting us.
Right.
And I just think going through an exercise where you can write down what's on your mind right now and asking God, how is that affecting me emotionally, can really allow God to kind of step into your heart and go, you need to deal with this with me, or you need to give this to me.
Right.
Something as simple as like, not being able to make your bills, or your car's broken down, or one of your close family members is sick, or you got bad news at work. I mean, there's a whole host of things that were affecting us.
Right.
But when you step in as a worship leader and now you have a whole team around you, everyone's got that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of creating space, I think, in conversation and go, what is really affecting us?
Right.
So that we can support each other, we can lean into each other, we can pray for each other.
Yeah.
And then we actually can see God work in our own individual lives as we're facing those things on our list.
Right. And so the exercise of the list wasn't necessarily to make a list to see things that you need to take off the list.
Oh, no.
It's more of just to help you be aware of what is happening in your life.
Yeah, because I think for me, especially, if I don't take time to, just kind of look inward and go, what's happening to me emotionally, then I think I'm not really being honest with myself.
Right.
And so I have a hard time then leading and cultivating an emotion or stirring an emotion through music or any other art form that I'm using if I'm not really being honest with myself of where I'm at. So for example, like if I went into a weekend worship service and I was being really affected by what was happening in my community and I wasn't honest about that, then I might actually lead a congregation in a worship experience that was completely disconnected from what really is going on in the community.
Right.
So to be emotionally aware as a worship leader is, I think, vital to actually doing it well.
Totally. I know for me, there's been times where, I've been leading worship for the past 15 years or so. And there's been times where you don't even really want to lead worship based on like maybe something that's going on in your life, or And you're just kind of like, man, singing these songs is maybe the last thing I'm wanting to do right now. But I'm doing it because, well, it's my job.
Yeah, right.
And you still kind of want to, but I don't know, but you still, there's this emotional disconnect.
Yes.
And I do feel like, though, the times that have been really meaningful, I think, for me, or I guess impactful, would be when I've just been honest and maybe even like shared honestly with the congregation. Like, hey, like, this is kind of happening in my life right now. When I sing this lyric, I'm really needing to say this,
Yes.
and just be honest and be real with people. Because I think most people in a congregation can really, meet you at that same place. Like, they get it. They probably are also going through things. Or,
Well, and I think congregations, they're probably turned off by a lot of the performance side of worship leading.
Yeah.
These days, at least it feels that way to me. I think people are really looking for a true spirituality. They're looking for people who are really upfront about their journey of faith and what they believe about God, how that's impacting their life. And as a worship leader, if you're emotionally aware of what's happening in your life and you can use it as a platform to lead and serve people in an experience of worship, they're going to follow you because they're not looking at someone who's fake.
right.
They're looking at someone who they can trust.
Yeah.
And who they can resonate with.
Right. Yeah. He's a real person.
He's real. And he's got real life stuff.
Yeah.
He's not just a dude up on the stage or a girl up on the stage who's a
Right.
great musician and isn't accessible.
Right. Because chances are there's people standing there also thinking, I don't want to sing this.
Oh, yeah.
Or I don't know if I really feel or like believe this right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing worship leader. You play this high energy, upbeat praise song about these unbelievable characteristics of God. And how many times I look at people and they don't seem to be with me. But I don't think it's because they don't want to worship. I just think it's a process that I'm allowed to take them through. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And if I can be aware of what's happening in their life and what's happening in my life, then I think I can do a better job of cultivating
Yep.
a real authentic expression of worship
Yep.
in that setting.
And I think that's where the word leading comes into play.
Yeah.
In leading worship, like you're leading people through this journey.
Yeah.
You're not up there just, performing and singing songs and them watching.
Right.
Like the leading them and being real with them, being honest. And I think this topic is so important because I do think that the emotional health of worship leaders and pastors is like overlooked big time. It's just like there's this expectation of like they need to get up on stage every week and perform well, like lead us well, give us a good sermon.
Yes.
And like it's like, well, wait, what's actually really going on in that person's life, and how are we caring for those people on our teams, who are doing that with us? So that's why I love this.
Yeah. Somewhere along the line, I convinced myself that as long as I read the Bible enough, and as long as I took care of my physical body, that I would be fine. But somewhere I think I've discovered that if I'm not paying attention to the emotional side of my life and what that means in my relationship with God, then I'm really ignoring a very big piece of my life in terms of being healthy and being a leader and being able to help the people that are around me have a healthy experience too.
Right.
Yeah.
We need to be protecting our hearts and what we're filling it with.
Yes.
Because we're filling it with all sorts of stuff. So a flourishing worship leader is what you were, you were like, okay, we want to be flourishing as worship leaders.
Yes.
And I just, I thought that was really cool. And you had a couple of different points through that of what a flourishing worship leader looks like. And I thought it'd be cool if you could take us through those.
Yeah. It's basically 3 C's. And the first one's character. And that's basically a flourishing worship leader has good character. It's a leader who worships with his heart, his mind, his soul, and his strength. And so there's this genuineness about he or she that allows the worship leader to lead from a place of authenticity.
And that kind of goes in with the list.
Yes. Yeah. And believe it or not, if you've got great character, someone's going to follow you. As soon as someone questions your character, they instantly are questioning whether or not they should follow you. I mean, you see that all over our culture, right?
Right.
These unbelievable leaders who have fantastic platforms and they have a character flaw, and instantly following them is questioned.
Yeah.
So character is a huge piece of being a flourishing worship leader. A character that loves Jesus and wants to follow after Jesus is something that someone's going to follow. And when they see that, then that means they can trust you. And trust is a big piece of leading people.
Right. That's really good. I can think of many ways that you can kind of display that, to your team and the people you're working with. I'm wondering, how could a worship leader display or show good character, on stage to all the people who are in the congregation? Because there's not like you get to have coffee one-on-one with all those people.
Right.
You just get on stage at the countdown, start the songs.
That's right.
Do you have any ideas of like how a worship leader, I guess, how is a character judged in a way?
I really value a lot collaboration. I think collaboration speaks volumes about the kind of worship leader that you are. If you're a worship leader that gets up there and sings every verse, every chorus of every song, every weekend, eventually they're going to get tired of your voice. They really will. But if you're someone who is willing to share the platform, to pass the baton, so to speak, to let others succeed while you're up there, then you're going to give the visual impression that it's not about you, but it's about the team.
Right.
And so I think collaboration is a very, very big piece of it. The other thing I would say is you don't have to lead every weekend. If you can create a system as a worship leader where you're inviting other worship leaders to join you and be a part of the experience at your church and it not be about you, you're going to begin to communicate that this isn't about you. And I think this says a lot about character. I think it says a lot about humility. It says a lot about how you view team. It says a lot about how you view the body of Christ. If you think your way of leading worship is the way for the church,
yeah, right.
Give it a few years and people will be pretty tired of you, I think.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much character seeps out of. Like you can,
Oh, yeah.
it actually can be identified in a lot of different ways.
I think it takes time. I think people over time see the kind of character you bring to the table. I also think that your character shows itself when you exhort the congregation or talk to them, your transitions between songs, the way you communicate to your congregation. Is it dripping with empathy and compassion, or does it have an edge or a
Like
or a shaming tone,
manipulative,
or I've got this figured out.
Yeah.
You need to catch up with me, so to speak.
Right.
I think the distance between you and the congregation should be very, very close.
Yeah.
And as a worship leader, the more distance you create with your congregation, the less they're going to trust your character.
Right.
And you look at Jesus and how he led the disciples. That wasn't Jesus being distant. That was Jesus being very intimate and very close.
Right.
And you're already at a disadvantage because you're on a stage and you have lights.
Yeah.
And people watching you. That whole context already creates separation.
Right.
So as a worship leader, you've got to work super, super hard to break that distance down and to get people to buy into really what you're trying to cultivate anyway, that it's not about you. It's about God. It's about worshiping him.
Yeah.
And really, ultimately, everything you've created is for them anyway.
Right.
I don't want them to come and watch me sing a song. I created the song so that you would sing it.
Yeah, right.
And so over time, if those types of words that you use are empathetic and they're compassionate and they're loving and they're true and they're graceful, then folks are going to catch on to your character and they'll follow you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah.
All right, so the 3 C's of a flourishing worship leader.
Yep.
We've got character.
Character, yep.
And then what's next?
Next one is confidence. I love this idea that congregations are not idiots. Okay? They can smell when someone is nervous. They just sense it. It's in our human nature. We can tell when folks are comfortable and when they're anxious, when they're nervous and when they're confident.
Right.
And confidence is one of these things that I think takes a lot of self-awareness and it takes a lot of faith.
Yeah.
If I know my calling, if I know that I have been created to be a worship leader, I've got the ability to do what God's called me to do. Now I just need to walk confidently in it. People will follow that.
Right.
But if every weekend I get up there and there's this sense of timidity about me or this sense of anxiousness about what I'm doing or why I'm doing it, or even that I don't even really believe what I'm doing, people can sniff that out.
Prime is the easiest way to run all of your multi-tracks and live performance. Download Prime from the App Store and browse our catalog of thousands of songs at loopcommunity.com. Prime has a full audio mixer, which allows you to adjust the volume, mute, and solo individual instruments in a song. Every song comes with a click and cue track, which will guide you through the song as you play. It's never been this easy to use multi-tracks and live performance. Download your copy of Prime today.
Wow, I think this is actually a very common thing that
Oh, I
people
totally- yeah.
struggle with.
Oh yeah.
And do you have any tips on like how like someone could overcome, let's just say they are having like, huge like nervous problems, or, they're anxious about it, or I know that sometimes worship leaders get really nervous when they have to speak. It's like they're fine with singing, but then the moment
So
that
you
they
gotta
have
talk.
the moment they have to like do like some sort of transition element,
Right. Yeah.
and they start
Yeah.
stumbling all over the words, like,
Yeah.
please take the offering. I mean, sit down. I mean, stand up. No, greet your neighbors or whatever,
Yes.
And you can tell like people get really nervous doing that. Like,
Yeah.
so if someone, I think this is a common one. And I think it does go, I honestly do think that what you said earlier, you already have a couple strikes against you in that you're on stage with lights on you. Everyone's watching you. Like that
Yes.
doesn't make it easy.
Make it easier. No.
Doesn't make it easier.
No.
What about you? Like, what do you,
Yeah, so there's a few things. One thing I don't think we do very well at all is evaluate. We don't take enough time to stop and look back and remember what we've done already. And so if we don't do a good job of that, how can we improve what we're doing in front of us?
right.
And so I think if as a worship leader you take time to look at the video from the weekend before and you assess how you've done, you're going to start to see the little things that you do that communicate a lack of confidence.
Yes. Right.
Communicate nervousness, communicate tension.
Cause you'll notice it too.
Oh, because you'll see it. Yeah.
Yep.
And I know people hate watching themselves. They hate hearing themselves.
Right.
But I've come to enjoy it. You know,
Right.
I've come to enjoy watching myself on video,
Right.
going, I cannot believe I'm still doing that.
Right. And it's not watching yourself to admire yourself. It's watching to improve. Kind of like a football team would watch the past
tape.
game.
I mean, they do it in sports all the time.
Yeah.
Right. Why would we not do this as worship leaders?
Right.
And do it in community. Bring the other worship leaders around and you all watch it together. And if you've got a group of worship leaders, do it every week. Every week you're watching the video of another worship leader. Or if you're in a multi-site context, get all the campus worship leaders together and watch the footage.
Yeah.
Evaluate each other, encourage each other. That's one way to deal with it. Another thing, there's something that worship leaders do where we assume that we can handle the transitions without practicing them. We're just going to feel it out. We're just going to sense what we should say when we should say it.
Yeah.
And I just think if you could write down that transition,
Yep.
what you're doing is you're isolating the main idea of the transition and you're giving yourself the ability to really think about what you want to say.
Right.
As a worship leader, I have very little time to speak because there are other people in the service that get to talk.
Yep.
And so I have to put a lot of stock and value in the words that I have. And if I don't take time to think through them, I'm really just not really taking a great responsibility for the platform I'm given. So I would suggest writing it down, either put it on your phone or your iPad, on a little note card on your music stand, whatever the situation is for you, but write out your transition. So if you're going from song 1 to 2 and the transition is really about just turning our focus to God, write it down.
Right.
That would be the second thing I would do.
That's why I love run-throughs,
Oh, run-throughs are great.
because you get to like run through the service as if it's an actual service.
Yes.
You do it without stopping, say everything you're going to say so that you can actually really see and feel how the service is going to go.
Yes. And I think too, like you can tell not just in the way a worship leader talks, but in the way the worship leader presents himself on the stage or herself on the stage. If he or she is awkward on the platform, people are going to see that. And so you have to practice. You have to rehearse.
Right.
I can't tell you how many worship leaders walk into a weekend and they've spent very little time actually playing the worship songs they're leading.
Right.
And I just think that's such a disservice to your congregation.
Right.
You've got to spend time playing your music. You've got to know what key you're in. I mean, these are the basics, right? Know your key you're in, know your tempos, know your key changes, know your progressions.
Yep.
Those simple things can make or break how confident you walk into a weekend.
Right.
And if I've spent the time preparing for all that and suddenly a change happens last minute on a Sunday morning or Saturday night, I can weather that change because I've done all the prep work and I can react to it without losing my confidence.
Yep.
And over time, you get better at this.
More prepared you are, more confident you'll probably
Without
feel.
a doubt.
Yeah.
So confidence is big. If you've got character and you've got confidence, people are going to want to follow you. Yeah.
So then what's the third?
The third one's
C?
chemistry. You can tell when a worship leader is up there with people supporting him versus a worship leader who's up there with his team and he's a part of the team. And I've seen worship experiences where the band just looks like they're just playing music and they could care less who's in front of them because they don't feel connected. And you can tell the teams that actually have spent time together and are for each other because the communication happens on stage. You just see it. They're smiling at each other. They're laughing before and after the service. Maybe you see them praying together before after service. They're having coffee together in the middle of the week. You can tell when a team's got chemistry. And when a team has chemistry and they're led by a worship leader who's got character and confidence, that congregation is going to want to follow that team because they trust them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Wow.
I mean, chemistry would be something that's like the worship leader works well with his team. He's not interested in the platform. He's interested in elevating those around him. He's someone who helps the others to flourish. Yeah.
Wow.
That's the chemistry piece. I don't think I ever want to be a worship leader who does it by myself.
Mm-hmm.
It's so crazy because I've been given opportunities to lead alone and I hate it.
Mm-hmm.
I would so much rather have at least one more person with me. It reminds me of that passage in Ecclesiastes where it says 2 are better than 1, for there's more return work on their labor.
Right.
And it's this idea that we were made to do things together. This walk of faith, this journey that we're in is not meant to be done alone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same way as a worship leader. We shouldn't be doing this alone.
Right.
Yeah. And the whole side of it, like, well, we're paying you to be the worship leader, so you need to lead every weekend. No. You're paying me to lead you in worship. And my value is if I'm going to lead you in worship, I'm going to lead you in a place that gets you beyond yourself. And the only way for me to lead you beyond yourself is for me to show it. So how do I lead from beyond myself? I bring other people with me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and empowering the people in your team
Yeah.
to do what God's created them to do. And
Yeah.
the team mentality. I think that is, man, that's so good.
Yeah.
So the 3 C's, flourishing worship leader: character, confidence, chemistry.
Yes.
And there's just this idea that if you are flourishing, then that means other worship leaders around you will also flourish.
Yes.
So not only the congregation will flourish in their worshiping, but the other people on your team, the other worship leaders on staff at your church, the other worship leaders in your community who are around you and are in community with you, it will help them flourish as well.
Yeah, and you can tell because your worship team will start declining your invitations.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I just mean like if you're not flourishing as a worship leader, the signs will show up. People don't want to play with you anymore. Play with someone else, or they play at another church. But if you're flourishing as a worship leader, people want to be on your team. They want to be on the schedule. And when they're not on the schedule, they go, "Hey, I haven't played in a while. I want to come back."
Yeah.
The people who are in the congregation go, "I want to be a part of that." When you start seeing those signs, those are signs that you're flourishing, that your team is flourishing. But if you find yourself struggling to fill gaps on your team, it could be a sign that maybe there's something else going on beyond the others on your team. Maybe it's way more to do with your own character and your own confidence, your own chemistry that you're allowing. As leaders, we're responsible for how we allow people to behave around us. And so much of that comes from having that inner character to recognize it in yourself.
That's very interesting.
I don't think people want to be a part of something that's suffering. No one wants to be a part of a team that's failing, and I feel bad about the Chicago Bears right now, but there's your parallel. I mean, like you don't want to be in an environment that feels negative. And as a worship leader, if you're creating an atmosphere that's negative, or this sense of failure, or this idea that you're not good enough to be with me, that's never good, because that never gives opportunity for people to grow. It never gives people for opportunity to take a risk, or to even reach beyond themselves as an artist. So to me, those are all short sell signs that people either want to be on your team or they don't. And those are, that helps you recognize for yourself, am I really doing this well? I've been really fortunate to be in churches where I've never had to ask twice for someone to play. When I ask someone to play, typically people have said, yeah, I'm all in. And I think that's a reflection of 2 things. It's a reflection of a healthy environment in your worship ministry, and it's a reflection of those artists themselves cultivating their own spiritual life. Mm-hmm. So it's both and.
Yeah.
But the worship leader has a very vital role in creating that environment for people to join the team and want to be a part of it.
Right.
And it's happening if people go, I haven't played in a while. When can I play again? That should speak volumes to you as a worship leader.
Yeah,
it means you're doing a great job.
You really can tell.
Yeah.
I can think of I visited a church where they had to do tons of services, and they're not paying their volunteers or anything, but the volunteers, they just loved being there.
They want to be there.
And they hung out in between. There was a 4-hour break between one of the services, and they all just stayed and hung
there,
out.
had lunch, stuff, whatever.
And they probably could have gone home and taken a nap or played Xbox or whatever.
Sure.
But you could tell that they just loved hanging out with each other.
Yes.
They loved being with each other, and they would do whatever it took to accomplish the mission on the weekend together.
Yep.
And I thought that was really awesome.
Yep.
And that's definitely a flourishing worship ministry.
Oh, absolutely.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you kind of talked a little bit about, I remember in the meeting you talked a little bit about how worship leaders are somewhat like a donkey. Which
the weirdest metaphor.
Anybody listening to this is probably like, where in the world is he going to go with this one?
As were you guys when I brought it up.
Yeah, right. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit about that.
Yeah. Metaphors are really good because they take two things that are not similar and they jam them together, and it creates a picture that originally may never have been thought possible. But when you take these two ideas that are not related and you jam them together, that's where creativity happens, really.
Right. And Jesus did that all the time.
All the time. And so it's this idea of a worship leader being like a donkey. And it's kind of humorous. But as you spend time thinking about this metaphor, you begin to see a lot of the rich parallels that can really help worship leaders flourish. And it comes from the triumphal entry. And I got a lot of these metaphors from a buddy of mine out in California. And it's the simple idea that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the triumphal entry on a donkey. And there were some specifics about the donkey that we don't really pay attention to. But if we do, we start to see some really good points and parallels for worship leaders. A, Jesus rode in on a donkey and the donkey had no name. B, the donkey itself was actually set apart for Jesus to use. So Jesus actually called and said, I want this particular donkey so that I can ride in on the city.
Right.
The donkey then just does what he's supposed to do. He brings Jesus into the city, right?
Right.
And when Jesus gets to the city, they're not worshiping the donkey, they're worshiping Jesus. You know? They're enamored by Jesus. They're not enamored by the donkey.
Yeah.
And then as you read the story, the donkey just slips into obscurity. He's gone. Like, you don't know what happens to the donkey. You have no idea where he ended up. And so a lot of those parallels to a worship leader in this way, your role as a worship leader is to bring Jesus to your congregation. It's simple as that.
Right.
You're creating space for people to engage a living God.
Right.
That has nothing to do with you. Absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as we get to a point where we think it does, we've hurt our role. Really.
Right.
I mean, imagine if the donkey had a name. Just simply, give a name to the donkey. Suddenly that donkey would be remembered for history as that name.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But
Thomas the donkey or something.
Right. No one remembers the donkey. In fact, no one's probably even thought about the donkey until they've listened to this podcast.
Right.
So
right,
no
but
one,
Mark
no
11 actually talks about the donkey.
Right. No one cares where that donkey came from, what farm it came from, who the farmer's owner was. And it's kind of like this. As a worship leader, I don't care what degree you've had. I don't care who you've played with before you played on the weekend, right? I don't care what your last name is. What I care about is whether or not you're going to bring me to a place to engage God. Mm-hmm. That's a massive role. And that's what the donkey did with Jesus.
Right.
He ushered Jesus right into the city.
He delivered Jesus to the worshipers.
That's right. Our job as worship leaders is simply to deliver our Messiah to them and then to disappear. And I think so many times as a worship leader, what I want so desperately is for people to show up and leave church going, wow, what a great God.
Right.
Man, God was here this weekend. Rather than going, Chad, you sounded great. Chad, I love that guitar part you played.
Yeah. What a great
man, your jeans were so cool. You know, whatever the compliment is.
Yeah, people weren't saying, wow, what an awesome looking donkey.
No, never.
Right. They were looking at Jesus.
Yeah. Now here's what's also peculiar. The donkey was at the worship service. The donkey was at the celebration of Christ. He was present. And so I think there's value to that too, that as a worship leader, you need to be present in your congregation's worship expression. It's not enough just to create an experience and give it to them. You actually have to engage in it. You actually have to be there with them. Right. And so when God moves in that weekend that you've planned, you have to be available to move with him and move with them. Because in the end, it's really about them anyway. Here's another piece of it. the donkey actually stepped on the branches that were laid down for the Messiah. It's not like there were these things that were laid down for a king, and Jesus said, "Let me get off the donkey because those things that were set apart for me are not intended for the donkey." It's quite the opposite.
Right.
Jesus actually got on the donkey and allowed the donkey to walk on these palm branches that are laid down on the ground.
Yeah.
As almost to say, you are welcome to go where I go.
Yeah.
You are welcome to be where I am.
Right.
I have asked you to be a worship leader. I've called you to be a worship leader. This is that confidence comes in. And now I'm asking you to walk where I've walked and to go where I'm going.
Yeah.
Because
and you're allowed to be a part of the story.
Yeah, you're allowed to be a part of the story. That's right. And the other thing is this, he was center stage. Everyone was looking at Jesus and the donkey at the same time.
Right.
And I think about us as worship leaders, a lot of times we're center stage, we're up front, and Jesus isn't physically present. So we're at a little bit of a disadvantage there. But I think the more that we lean into displaying Christ in the way that we lead, the less and less they're going to see you, and the more and more they're going to see Jesus.
Right.
And that's what I want anyway.
Yeah, that's what's it about.
That's what I want anyway.
That's what it's about.
The other part of this story is that this donkey was actually prophesied about way back in Zechariah. And so there's also this prophetic calling that God has on worship leaders, where he looks into the future and says, I want that person, that person, that person, and that person to lead my church in worship, to bring me to those people. And when as a worship leader, you lean into that confidence and you lean into that security that God has really ordained you to do this, that this is not just for anyone to do, but this is for you to do, man, you can do great things. Because the reality is that Jesus wants to be brought to his people by you.
Right.
That's the beautiful thing about it. It's not like he can do it without you. I mean, he can do it without you, but it's not like he wants that. He wants to actually be ushered by you.
Right.
What a humbling experience that is.
It's so amazing. I love that story.
Yeah,
and just
it's beautiful.
That metaphor is just it's awesome because you can see those 3 C's all through there.
All through that. And the other thing I would say and this is the last piece of it. The donkey did what the donkey was supposed to do. He didn't do more than he should. He didn't do less than he should. He
Right.
did exactly what he was created to do.
Right.
And on the weekends that I go in and I do more than I've been created to do, I suffer. Either I've extended too far and I've taken the congregation to a place they shouldn't have gone, or I've hurt myself. And if I do less than I should, then I've done a disservice, not only to myself, but to my church.
Right.
And so I think that there is a high value in leading worship in a way that says, I'm going to lead based on what I've been created to do. So if you're a piano player and a vocalist, you lead from piano and vocal. You know, I think there's room to grow and to try new things, but ultimately, be who you are and do what you've been designed to do.
Right.
Don't try to be like everybody else.
Right.
I just think we, as worship leaders, we get in this pitfall so much because we are trying to emulate and be like some other worship leader that seems to be doing it so much better than us.
Yeah.
When the reality is that has nothing to do with it.
Right.
You know, it has everything to do with where God has put you now.
Yeah. Just be who you are. Be
who
who
you
God
are.
made you to be.
That's right. And if you've got great character and you've got great confidence and you're building chemistry with your team, you're going to be doing that. You're going to be functioning in that.
Yeah.
And then it has less to do with showing up and being a showman. It has less to do with the music you're playing. It has so much more to do with worshiping the God that we're there for anyway. Yeah.
Wow.
And then, you know, of course, the donkey just disappears. And there's that Monday morning hole as a worship leader where you get up on Monday and you go, okay, next week's coming again. And I have to put the weekend behind me and move on to the next one. And I don't think anyone wakes up on Monday and goes, man, it was so great to see Chad.
Yeah, right.
But I bet you.
Yeah, I wonder what Chad's doing.
Yeah.
What did happen to the donkey? It's
Right.
never mentioned again.
Never mentioned again. And how many times people go, what is it you do during the week? I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit okay with that because it's not about me anyway. And so I don't need people to know what I'm working on in the middle of the week.
Right.
What I need people to do is to buy in and to really lean into this God that I know loves me very much and loves them very much.
Yeah.
And if every weekend I'm taking them to that place, then it's a matter of just letting go. And like the donkey did, he just brought Jesus to the city and disappears.
Wow.
It's beautiful.
It is.
Absolutely beautiful.
So worship leaders, be a donkey.
Yeah, man, be a donkey.
Just be a donkey,
Now,
delivering
I will say
Jesus
this,
to people.
and this is the tension of a metaphor, because metaphors are not, they're limited in their expression and their understanding. I think worship leaders need to be known. I think people want to follow people they know. And while I'm advocating for it not being about us, I think there's value in being a worship leader who is approachable and who is visible and who doesn't come on the stage and then go backstage and after the service, you can't find him or her.
Right.
You know, when he or she's leading worship, there should be the sense that I'm here, I'm with you, let's do worship. And when worship's over, I'm still here. I'm still accessible. And during the week, you can call me on the phone, you can send me a text message, you can send me an email, and I will get back to you.
Yeah.
Because I'm approachable and I'm visible.
Right.
And so I think that's where the donkey metaphor kind of breaks down.
Yeah.
Is that I want people to feel like I'm not in this for the music and the show.
Yeah.
I'm so much more in this to engage with them and engage our God together and grow together.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, I've got to be present. I've got to be visible.
Maybe the donkey was well known in the town as
Maybe.
a trustworthy carrier source or something.
Maybe. You know, one thing I like about the metaphor is that the donkey had never been used before.
Oh,
There was
right. It does say that, doesn't
yeah,
it?
it does it. So there's this sense of sacredness to the role.
It was a colt, right? Didn't it say it was like a
It was
baby
a colt.
donkey? Or
Yeah. It was
young.
So it's young. It's this young colt, you know. And when you go back to the Old Testament, you look at Old Testament worship, and you look at the animals that were sacrificed. They were pure. They were spotless, right? What is Jesus? He is the pure, spotless Lamb. There's this sense that who you are as a worship leader is sacred, and you should never question that. When God speaks to you and He tells you that He wants you to be a worship leader and lead your church, there's a holiness to that, and you should never question it because it's the living God speaking to you.
Right.
And the times in my life where I have questioned that, God has so graciously and lovingly brought people in my life to speak right back to me and go, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. Many people don't know this, but I used to be an architect. I went to school for architecture. And shortly after I graduated school, I had a full-time job and ended up moving across the country to take on an architectural project job. And so I was a project manager for almost 2 years. And during those 2 years, I went through an unbelievable questioning of whether or not I was going to do local church ministry again. Almost to the point where I had taken steps to get an entirely different degree. And I remember one day coming home and telling my awesome wife that I was thinking about not going into worship ministry anymore, but I was thinking about becoming a project manager. And she looked at me square in the face and she said, "Are you sure that's what God wants you to do?" I mean, you talk about grace. You talk about mercy and love being spoken right at me through my wife,
Right.
my teammate. And it's just an awesome reminder that when God speaks to you and He calls you to lead worship, you lean into that as much as you can because it's something that God's ordained. You know, it's something that He's spoken to you about. I imagine if the disciples went and got the donkey wouldn't go. There's nothing in the story about that, the stubborn donkey, right? He just did it. And I think there's so much value to that. So,
That is. Oh, man. This is good stuff. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. And
Yeah, man.
I know it's going to bless a lot of the worship leaders who are
Hope so.
listening to this. And
Yeah, I hope so.
I just really appreciate your heart to pour into worship leaders.
Thanks, man.
And into your team. I mean, I've seen firsthand you just lead your team so well, and like they feel very loved and cared for. And it's not just like, hey, get here on time and hit accept on Planning Center.
No.
But it's like, how are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
how's your life? Like, what?
Yeah.
You texted me this morning and we're like, how are
did,
you
yeah.
feeling after the weekend? I know it's exhausting.
It is.
And that's
Because I'm feeling it too.
right. And that is, that's a worship pastor who really cares for his people.
Thanks, man.
And that's awesome. And I think it's just really important. This is going to be a great reminder for worship leaders to really just be focusing on these things so that you're flourishing in what you're doing. So
Yeah.
thanks, brother.
Thanks for having me.
One, two, three. Mailbag!
What's up, community? This is Jansen.
Hey, this is Matt McCoy, and this is the part of the podcast where we answer your questions.
It's mailbag time.
Mailbag time. Our first question, Jansen, you want to take that?
Totally. Our first question comes from Samantha of Asheville, North Carolina. Samantha says, "My church has a small budget for our worship team. and I want to start using tracks, but I don't know what equipment to get. So what are the essentials?
Well, you came to the right place.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. We actually get this from time to time, pretty often. And so if you're not used to using things like inner monitors, you just have these speakers on stage that play the music back so the band can hear themselves. The simplest way to do this is with a free app called Prime. This is an app that we've developed. It's really great. It works for iPhone, iPad, and now it works for your MacBook if you have a MacBook. So you just download the free app. And we also sell a $20 split cable that's on our website, and it gets the audio from your device to the system in your church. And if you don't have inner monitors, but you have, you want to just get that implemented, we suggest that you just get the drummer on a click. Like if you can get your band playing to a click, that is the greatest thing. So you can have a little mixer board and just have the audio go from your device to the mixer so your drummer can hear it, and then the band plays along to the drummer. And that's really cheap. The app is free. You already have your device, and then you may just need an audio cable, and that's it. Awesome.
That's it? That easy?
That is the magic. That's how you make the magic happen.
That's awesome. So question number 2 that we got from Jonathan and Charlotte. He says, how often should I introduce new songs to my church?
Wow.
That's a good question, right?
Yeah, that is a good question.
I understand the temptation to want to introduce new songs, because you hear a new song on an album and you're like, oh, I love this. And because I love it, everyone in my church will probably also love it.
And they're going to be blown away by the song.
Right. And there's the temptation to teach it right away. But there is a hard thing in that, when you're leading worship, the point of leading worship is that everybody is joining in together with you and singing with you, and that you're not just performing and singing to them. I don't know, Jason, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, but I know that for me, what has worked in the past is like maybe when you have a new song that you want to introduce, you play it, maybe during the offering or during like a special music moment.
Totally.
Not all churches have that, but maybe if your church has a moment as the offering is being passed around that you can play the new song, and people are kind of just listening and enjoying. It also gives you a good way to see if people like it. You can kind of tell when you're looking out, you can kind of look in people's faces and see like, oh yeah, people are getting this. They want to sing along.
Response?
Or they stand and sing with you.
Totally.
And that can give you a way to easily introduce it to them, but also know whether or not you should bring it back or not.
Yeah, I've definitely been in that situation where it's like, I am on top of the world with this song, and then all of a sudden I introduce it and it just doesn't go. It just kind of falls flat on its face. And other times it's been really, really great.
Right. I don't know. I would guess that maybe a rule of thumb is kind of like more than one new song a month.
Yeah. I think it's a good rule to have anywhere from 60 to 70 songs in your current repertoire, meaning you do the same 60 or 70 songs for a good season at least.
For like a year or what?
Yeah, I would say for at least 6 months. And then after that, you can change it. And the good times to change these, right, are like different seasons. So as the spring comes or the fall comes and the school year starts, you can change these songs.
Roll some out, roll some new ones in.
Totally, yeah. You can, some of the older songs like Mighty to Save, if you're still doing that one, that might be an older one.
Right.
And you can always go back and visit those, right? So you may have 500 songs in your database, but, roll through those 60. And that helps the church really get solidified on knowing those songs. It helps them feel like they can get involved. They know it.
Yep.
And then, like you said earlier, I think maybe, what if you just get a song and you teach it to your congregation for that month? So every week you do it and just kind of, integrate that.
Another trick to teaching your congregation a new song would be to actually slip the song into the walk in and walk out music.
Ooh, that's a good idea.
So that and you just start playing it maybe for a couple weeks before you actually play it in the worship set.
Yeah.
So that people kind of, by the time that you actually play it in a set, people are like, oh, this sounds familiar. I've heard this before. And they don't really even realize where they've heard it.
Right.
But it's in the, when they're in the bathroom, they hear the music playing.
Right. There's a large percentage of churches that listen to Christian radio. And what we're seeing in the trend, at least I've seen this, is more and more worship music is starting to kind of bleed into the radio. So it's not just like CCM stuff, but you're seeing like Chris Tomlin's song or Bethel's music or whatever in there. So I think that they're probably used to hearing that song. They may have already heard it. So if you use that technique, I've heard this before in the car. So it kind of makes a connection.
Yep. Another idea would be, when you introduce a new song, to maybe even just teach them the chorus. Don't kick the band off right away with the whole arrangement, but be like, hey, we're going to teach you a new song this morning, and you just sing it on acoustic guitar.
Right.
Just to get people they know that it's a new song and they can learn it and start singing along. So that's a great question. Thank you, Jonathan. You guys, if you have any other questions, we are here to answer them. You can email us always at podcast@loopcommunity.com. We want to hear from you.
See you guys.
This is Community Talk.
Come on. That's an awesome interview.
So good.
I mean, I feel like Chad has so much. We could have kept talking for another half hour, and gotten so much more information. I thought, you know what, we need to have him on again because there's so much that he has to share just for the local worship leader.
Yeah.
Why we're doing what we're doing, and kind of just refocuses you on what matters. And
right. He, like you said right before the interview, nuggets of wisdom. There were so many, and he thinks for other people. He wants other people to be included, and he wants other people to be fed and learn from them, which I really liked. And he had just a genuineness about him.
I love that about Chad, is that he really just wants other people to succeed.
He does.
There's you get this vibe sometimes from some worship guys who are it's kind of about them, and that they're the ones that are wanting to succeed and everybody else is. I've actually heard Chad say we don't want everyone in our band and our team to feel like they're supporting us, that they're supporting the worship leader, but that we're all in this together, that we're doing it together, and that he is like that. He is he's all about the team and letting other people succeed.
For sure. Yeah, I love what he talked about at the beginning when you said you went to a coffee shop and he met with the worship leaders. That's an extra thing. That's not a mandatory thing. And when you see the leaders step out of what they have to do, and do stuff for you, that's always really helpful and can bring a team together and shows that they care.
Mm-hmm. Right. What things stuck out to you in the podcast?
Yeah, he talked a lot about being fed, and I think that's important whether you're a worship leader or you run sound or wherever you're serving in ministry. If you're not being fed by the Lord yourself and spending quality personal time with him, as well as focusing on where you're at emotionally. Chad talked a lot about that, and really taking time for yourself. If you're not feeding yourself and being fed, you're going to dry up pretty quick. And then you can't feed other people. And it's really hard to lead other people if you're not feeding yourself first.
Yep. You can burn out really fast.
Yeah.
I know I've had seasons where it's been like that, where, I'm leading, 3 services on a weekend, 4 services on a weekend at some churches.
Right.
And you can if you're not feeding yourself at all, you can just start getting up there just out of routine, almost robotic, and you just kind of go through the motions. But what ends up happening is you're totally dry and depleted and you can't continue. That's not a long-term plan.
And it'll also make you hate what you do.
Exactly.
I remember a time in college where I took on a bunch of extra ministry tasks for a group I was with, and it started out great, and then I stopped being fed myself. And after a while I approached a leader and I was I need to quit. I need to be done. And he talked to me more about it, and we figured out it wasn't that I had too much. It was that I was treating it like a job and wasn't feeding myself and wasn't realizing what I was doing was for God and the heart behind it. So
and I think that's another big principle that he talked about too, was an easy way to burn out is when you are trying to be the superhero in the story.
Yeah.
And you're not a team player, or you're not letting other people succeed in what they're doing. So if you insist on doing everything, that's a for sure sign you're going to burn out eventually.
Right.
And that doesn't really work for the longevity of the rest of your team.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's really messed up because now you've burned out and your team maybe doesn't feel like they have the permission to lead and step up and lead.
And then they're going to burn out and they're not going to want to do it. He talked about how you'll notice that people will start to not want to be a part of your team. You'll ask them to lead and they'll be like, no, that's okay. But when they see that you care and you pour into them, they're going to be like, hey, I'd love to lead this weekend and next weekend.
Right.
And it continues, it builds off of it.
Right.
It's a lot.
And so I think practically for a worship leader, and I think what's also interesting about this is a lot of it doesn't have to do just with worship leading.
Right.
I mean, this could be serving in church, right? Because you greeted me at church this past week.
Yeah.
So I think it goes into any sort of volunteering, serving role at a church. But I think when you think about it from a worship leader's perspective, an example of that might be, you've got a 5-song worship set and you've got a couple vocalists up on stage with you. And some worship leaders, I think there's a temptation just for the worship leader to sing everything.
Right.
For a practical example for a worship leader, it'd be like, maybe you're a worship leader, you've got a 5-song set, and maybe you have 2 vocalists on stage. Well, sometimes there's this temptation for the worship leader just to lead all 5 songs.
Right.
And then you've got 2 vocalists that aren't leading anything.
Yeah.
But then you burn out, because after 3 services, you're super tired. And you also didn't really pour into your team and let them kind of step up and take a leadership role. And so I think an example here would be, maybe let someone else on your team sing one of the songs, rotate the songs. I know with Chad, when I've led at Christ Church, he and I have led together a few times, and he and I will kind of tag team the set. And that's actually like such a fun way to lead.
Yeah,
it's
for
not
sure.
all about just one person at all, but it's also like just a really, I don't know, it brings just a real life to the whole atmosphere of just like sharing it.
Yeah, he also talked about letting like somebody else lead for a week and take a week off, and they'll run with that responsibility a lot of times instead of being afraid that I have to do it every single week. And he said your church may push back on that a little bit, but explain to them, like, if you want me to lead worship, I need to lead this team and give them responsibility to lead without me one week.
Right.
And that'll help you feed yourself and not burn out, and also help your team take a new grasp on their role.
Yeah. I will submit this challenge to any worship leader listening. Try this sometime. Have someone else on your team lead for the weekend, and don't be on stage, but instead just stand at the back and greet people as they walk in. And it'll be just a totally new experience for you. And it's really cool because you get to, one, just really have like a one-on-one connection with all the people walking in and get to meet them. It kind of like helps break down any sort of wall that there might be between the congregation and a stage. Because if you're on the stage all the time and people don't know you, like you haven't like met them.
Right.
It's like such a cool thing to do, to be able to meet the people that are in the congregation that you're leading. And then at the same time, you're also giving the leadership reins over to another leader on your team.
Yeah.
Which is really special.
That's a great idea. Do it.
Do it. What else stood out?
He talked about 3 C's of that.
Yeah, so the 3 C's I thought were awesome. I thought was really cool what he said about character was that people with character are people that other people want to follow.
Yes.
People want to follow people with character.
Right.
And along with that is, just having strong faith. And then the next C was chemistry, which is, empower other people in your team. Lead the team well. Like, do everything you can to develop and build chemistry on the team. And that takes work. It doesn't always just come naturally. Like, you have to really work at that. And the other C was confidence. And this one's a good one. Especially for musicians, this can be a hard one.
Yeah.
Because people, get stage fright, or they get nervous about singing something. And, people in your team, guys who are doing this, full time, maybe don't experience that all the time.
Right.
But you have to remember that people in your team, maybe like your new keyboard player, or your new bass player, or your new vocalist that you auditioned last week and this is their first week, they probably are really experiencing trouble with confidence. And so just encouraging your team members to, not have hesitation, to, just be who they are.
Yeah, I think confidence is important too, because a lot of times you can compare yourself to others, and then it actually makes you worse because you're comparing yourself, and so you get nervous and your quality of your playing goes down, and then people just think you didn't practice or you aren't like good, and then your confidence lowers, so it kind of snowballs. So yeah, just as a leader of your team, you can really encourage people. And if you see that somebody, you're like, you know how to play this part, you're just nervous, you're not bad. And so just encouraging your team and having confidence in them and having confidence in yourself is really important. And that's going to build the chemistry of your team.
And it translates from stage. You really can tell when someone has confidence.
You can.
You can tell when there's chemistry. Character, do you think you can tell that?
I think you can, because I think a good character person is going to try to do the other two.
Right.
I mean, you can definitely tell, of course, when they're not leading. It may be a little harder, like just if you're in the congregation, to see someone and be like, oh, I wonder if they have good character. But if there's someone who is practicing and leading with confidence and the team seems to have good chemistry, then I feel like as a congregation member, you really can see the character in the team.
Right. Yeah, those 3 C's are important for a flourishing worship leader.
Yeah. I like what he talked at the end about the metaphor of the donkey.
Yeah.
And I think we should just go into that a little more, because it's such an interesting thought when you read that story in the Bible. You don't think about the donkey. You kind of skim over the sentences about the donkey being a colt and why is that important? It's just a donkey.
Right.
Jesus is what's important. And I think in that's what you have to do as a worship leader. You have to disappear, like he said, and bring Jesus to the people and not want anything for yourself in return.
Right.
I think I get hung up a lot when you serve or lead worship. I can get hung up on, okay, I'm doing these things for Jesus. I brought Jesus to people, but look, I did it. Like, I don't need you to tell me that I did anything for you, but I want you to know that I did it.
Right.
And that's not how we should think. We should want to disappear and have the focus all be on Jesus. Jesus allowed me to bring him. He chose me to bring him in worship.
Yeah.
And that's so important, and that can change your whole aspect of your team when they think like that.
Right. I just think it's so cool too that God included the donkey in the story.
Yeah.
Because like that whole story in the Bible could have easily just left out the donkey part of
Right.
it. Like there was a whole part ahead of it explaining like where to go find the donkey and to get the donkey and
Right.
like that whole part could have been left out. You know, could have just said Jesus came into Jerusalem.
Right.
You know? But it's cool that God like even just included the donkey in the story because I think that's what he does with us. And that's such an awesome thing is he even just lets us be a part of the story.
Yeah.
And it's not about us. And that's the thing too. Like when you're reading through the Bible and you get to those page after page after page of like, you know, all the names.
Yeah.
You know, this person's son is this person, you know? And it's like, oh, it's such a bore to read that stuff. But when I read that, I'm always thinking, it's cool though that God like cared enough to like let those people be included.
Yeah.
You know, like
He did.
like they matter. Like they're part of the story.
Yeah.
And that's us. We get to be a part of God's story. But yeah, but it's not about us. Yeah, that was my favorite part about what he talked about.
For sure.
Let's be the donkey. Step out of the way. Don't bring the attention to ourselves.
Don't do it.
Just bring Jesus to the people.
Yeah.
And that's, man, I mean, that's what a worship leader is supposed to do every single weekend. Bring Jesus to the people and your
Disappear.
your job's done. So it's awesome, man. We've got some good interviews planned for 2018.
We do. Good ones coming up.
And we always want to hear from you guys. So if you have any feedback, any questions, any good jokes, send us an email to podcast@loopcommunity.com. It's been great, Derek.
Yeah, it has. Chad was awesome. I'm glad we got to hear that. Let's hear more from him soon.
Yep. We'll see you guys later.
See ya. Hey, you're still here? Go subscribe.